On different nights, a taxi driver picks up 4 women from 4 busy streets of Hong Kong.
There was some degree of similarity between the first 3 victims. They all worked in the entertainment industry.
All 4 are destined to meet a common fate.
You're actually observing almost a dissection of the body in the bedroom floor.
He captures them on camera and preserves their body parts in jars.
At least one of the boxes contained a severed female breast.
There was an initial sort of awe of silence.
Is he a cold-blooded serial killer?
He's a sexual deviant, and he was a psychopath.
Or a victim of warped morality?
To put it very simply, what they have to determine is whether this man is mad or bad.
One man leaves Hong Kong repulsed and intrigued. On a February morning in 1982, at the Shingwang River in Hong Kong's Sha Tin district, a construction worker sees something strange floating in the water. He's horrified to realize he's looking at a decomposed human head. Detective Constable Stephen Lowe was part of the Hong Kong homicide team at that time.
從佢嘅專業角度睇咧，呢個死者大約都係20至到25歲，係一個年青嘅中國籍嘅女子嚟。
200 yards from where the head is found in the water, police find a pair of human legs in a yellow plastic package.
或者有一個可能性咧，就係兇手咧，即係犯案嘅人咧，係將呢個死者嘅殘肢咧係不同咁樣部位咁去拋棄，去意圖毀屍滅跡。
For 4 days, the police search the river. Finally, they find a torso and a pair of dismembered arms, one with a tattoo. Joe Cheng, a Hong Kong crime reporter, remembers the findings that morning.
就有2隻燕子同埋有把刀插住個心喎。咁就其實喺嗰個年代，喺80年代嘅時間咧，紋身尤其是女性，即係當時睇到嗰個係女性嚟㗎啦，已經紋身係非常少嘅。咁就警察咧就憑呢個紋身咧就走去做一啲調查工作。
Police revealed that the body parts belonged to Chan Fung Lan, a 21-year-old nightclub hostess and mother of 2. Reported missing by her husband a week earlier. She was last seen getting into a cab on Kimberley Road in Tsim Sha Tsui East. The postmortem reveals Chan Fung Lan's been dead for 5 to 10 days.
咁咧就喺警察揾到佢嘅身份之後咧，就曾經咧就調查佢屋企嘅背景。咁其實嗰陣時發現佢同佢嗰個先生，佢嘅丈夫啦，個感情係有啲問題嘅。
咁但係經過調查之後咧，發覺佢老公嘅嗰個犯案嘅嗰個即係個機會咧係好微嘅，因為佢老公咧都提出咗佢嘅不在場證據。
Ruling out Chan's husband as a suspect, police are forced to go back to the taxi stand at Kimberley Road, where Chan was last seen alive.
咁我哋其中一個調查嘅方向咧，係亦都揾全香港嘅的士司機睇下有冇喺佢失蹤當晚咧接載呢個死者。但係咧，目擊證人咧係未能夠提供呢個的士嘅車牌俾我哋。
The police reach a dead end. Months go by. The torso case remains unsolved. 6 months after the discovery of the dismembered body of Chan Fung Lan, a young man deposits a roll of film at a Kodak store in Tsim Sha Tsui. The technician develops the film, totally unprepared for what he is about to see. Forensic pathologist Dr. Philip Bay remembers the photos that came from the Kodak store that Monday morning.
They were showing bodies, well, or part of a body which had been cut open, but not in a way that any of us recognize as a surgical cut. The usual things you expect with operations, the green tablecloth, the surgical lights and the glove hands, etc. So this was unusual.
The police suspect homicide. Questioning of Kodak staff reveals that the customer who dropped off the film is a young Chinese male and a regular at two branches, Tsim Sha Tsui and Mong Kok, bustling areas of Kowloon.
佢即係提供呢個客人嘅年齡啦，佢嘅樣貌俾我哋咯。咁同埋佢話呢個客人咧，佢用嘅菲林啊都係好專業嘅。
When detectives look through the enlarged pictures again, they discover an uncanny resemblance in one of the photos to Lung Wai-sung, a 17-year-old schoolgirl reported missing by her parents earlier that month. But without the customer's name or address, the police don't have much to go on, except that these latest photos have yet to be collected by their photographer. Teams of police in plain clothes watch the two Kodak stores.
咁啊，當時嘅指示咧就係去截停同埋查問呢個攞相嘅人嘅，即係嚟沖曬呢個男子。
After several hours, a taxi pulls up at the Mong Kok store. A young man gets out and walks into the shop. A prearranged signal with store employees indicates that this is the suspect. The officers move in.
佢話啲相咧係佢一個行船嘅朋友，即係做海員嘅朋友咧，係託佢攞去沖曬嘅啫。
The man says he is meeting the friend later that evening at a place close by. The detectives agree to wait with him. But no one shows up. The Kodak store customer is placed under arrest.
當時咧係 check 嗰部的士先，咁喺嗰部的士嗰個擋風玻璃度咧就揾到一個手球同埋把刀出嚟。
The arrested man is identified as 27-year-old Lam Kor-wan, a Hong Kong night shift taxi driver. Although he collected photos of the missing schoolgirl, Lam denies all association with her. He's taken to the police headquarters for questioning. Another team heads towards his house in To Kwa Wan, in the western part of Kowloon. What they don't know is that they are about to stumble upon one of Hong Kong's biggest homicide stories. A number of body parts have been discovered along the Shingmun River. Police have a suspect, taxi driver Lam Kor-wan. Martin Richmond, senior inspector in charge of Hong Kong Police's homicide department, was part of the search team that headed towards Lam Kor-wan's family home in To Kwa Wan.
This was a first-floor walk-up flat in quite an old building. The actual area of the flat was itself quite small, probably 400, 500 square feet. And within that area, quite typical for Hong Kong at the time, you had a whole family living within that small flat. Lam's room was directly opposite the entrance door, and that room in particular was indeed much smaller, probably 10 feet by about 5 to 6 feet wide, very small indeed.
As the officers enter Lam's room, they're struck by the number of things that have been packed into the small space.
There were suitcases, photographic equipment, recording equipment. There were a great number of books.
At first glance, Lamb's room looks like a well-equipped photo studio.
Over the course of the search of the room, we disclosed what for an individual would be a very large amount of personal photographic equipment. Given that we knew that Lamb was employed as a taxi driver, some of it was very expensive equipment, and he must have saved very hard to have obtained it.
As they go over the tiny living space, an officer chances on a big trunk under the bed.
This was in the form of a military ammunition box, and it appeared to me that this large box had appeared in the photographs which had been taken from Kodak. So we were fairly sure that the room had been used in some way to take the photographs which had been seized.
The trunk reveals a huge stash of porn, books on human anatomy, and thousands of photographs of severed female body parts. The team also finds stacks of videotapes, a red handbag, and a pair of white shoes. Amazingly, they also discover surgical equipment. When an officer sees a familiar tattoo in one of the photos, they know this case has just become bigger than they first thought. But even this doesn't prepare them for what they stumble upon next.
Under the bed, we found some plastic food containers. They were sealed. And as the masking tape was taken from the seal and they were opened, we could see that they contained some strong-smelling liquid. It seemed to be a form of formaldehyde or preserving fluid.
What is this?
And in the boxes were certainly body parts.
The police discover a macabre collection of female body parts, pickled in Tupperware jars and preserved like forensic specimens. Lamb's tiny photographic studio had just turned into a female slaughterhouse.
It seemed to me, on reflection, that at least one of the boxes contained a severed female breast. One of the boxes contained pubic parts. It was quite horrific at the time, and it's certainly something I would never forget.
There was an initial sort of awe of silence. Everyone was sort of, I suppose, shocked or surprised about the things that they found in that room.
The forensic team discovers shavings of female pubic hair in the debris and small specks of blood and flesh on the walls. The detectives take 4 days to complete a thorough forensic examination of the room, and the flat is sealed. But it will take them weeks to analyze and catalog all the evidence. The police also arrest Lam Kor Wan's father, Lam Wai Lok, and half-brother Lam Kwok Kung, who live with Lam in the same flat.
It would have astonished anybody at that time to think that a single person could have been capable of achieving what Lam achieved on his own. That's why the male members of the family fell under considerable suspicion.
At police headquarters, Lam Kor Wan continues to plead ignorance. So the detectives focus their attention on his father and brother.
His younger brother had a very strange relationship with Lam. Lam was a very secretive person. Although they shared this tiny room, his brother really only used it for sleeping, putting his head down overnight. The brother told us that if he touched anything particularly any of Lamb's camera equipment, any of his records, he would get a good thrashing. He was astonished to realize what had been going on in that room. He was horrified.
The evidence collected from the room begins to pile up, but Lamb seems indifferent.
He appeared to be somewhat devoid of much emotion. No doubt he was obviously thinking ahead and anticipate the type of questions they're going to be asked. He knew what was in his room. He knew that it would be disclosed.
But without a body, police know they can only keep Lamb in custody for 2 days. They intensify their investigations. A small team of police systematically go through the videos from Lamb's room. Within a few hours, they discover a tape that cracks the case wide open. They find themselves watching a multicam recording of Lamb taking pictures of a naked woman in his own bedroom.
What struck me was, one, it was a homemade video. In 1982, in Hong Kong at least, very few people I knew had home video cameras, never mind making videos themselves. You see him moving around, and not only was he videoing, he was taking photos, because you could see that with the flash that goes off every time he was trying to take photos.
As they watch in horror, Lamb's makeshift photo studio is transformed into a private post-mortem theater.
You're actually observing almost a dissection of the body in the bedroom floor of someone's house. When it came to the second or third body, you could see that he had improved. He was cutting more deliberately. He knew perhaps more how deep he wanted to cut in some of the parts.
With this horrifying evidence in hand, the police can now present Lamb before a magistrate court and detain him for further questioning.
At that time, what obviously needed to be answered was, you had body parts that were kept and that were found in this room. It's presumptuous to suggest that they necessarily came from the victims in the video.
With barely a few hours to go before Lamb is produced in court, police need to extract a confession.
Lamb had been arrested on suspicion of murder. If sufficient evidence had not been available with which to charge him within 48 hours, we would have had to have released him.
Finally, they find Lamb's weak spot and zero in.
阿林國雲咧，佢突然間咧某一次咧就係詢問我哋調查嘅人員咧，屋企所揾到嘅相咧，我哋會唔會發放出去嘅？咁啊，於是我哋答佢咧，我哋話咧，佢呢單 case 我哋咧同埋所揾到嘅證物咧，事後咧全世界都會知嘅，我哋會供給俾傳媒知嘅。
Convinced that the world would get to see his trophies, Lamb finally confesses to the police. He admits he took the photos, dismembered and dissected women, and preserved their private parts. Lam Kor Wan is immediately charged with murder. As Hong Kong awakes to the news of the gruesome events, it becomes clear that a serial killer had been driving their streets for the last 6 months. Lam Kor Wan, a 27-year-old taxi driver, is charged with murder and remanded in extended police custody by a magistrate's court. His confessions to the police are disturbing. 6 months before the arrest, Lam drives around Chim Sa Tsui in the Kowloon Peninsula, hoping to pick up his final ride of the night.
he would know that when the clubs were closing and when the entertainment establishments were closing, a lot of single women would be emerging from those places. Likewise, he would place himself in taxi queues at places where perhaps where women like that might be wanting to get a cab home. Precisely what happened in the case of the first victim.
On Kimberley Road, Lam sees a woman step out of a nightclub. Her name is Chan Fung Long, a nightclub hostess.
She had come out from work and in fact was, we understand from her sister, who met her after work, was the worse for wear. She'd had quite a lot to drink. Her sister tried to persuade her to go home with her. She refused and was last seen walking up a line of taxis. But she was actually refused entry by a couple of taxis because she was in quite a state. Eventually got into either the third or fourth, which we now know to be Lam's cab.
Lam picks her up.
佢飲到醉醺醺咧，就搭咗林過雲嗰部的士嘅。咁佢一路咧都喺度，即係又話轉左，又話轉右，又話成咁啊，令到林過雲咧好煩囂，即係好對呢個女死者咧好討厭。跟住咧，呢個女死者曾經佢喺佢嘅車度嘔過嘅。
Lam told us that this was something which he found rather offensive and something which he felt might stop him from going through with what he was thinking of doing.
But something in Lam snaps. He has had enough.
Then, all in a rush, he said, he then went round and he strangled her.
Once she was killed, Lam used a gunny sack, which he had in the boot of the taxi, to put the body into the sack. As on other nights, Lam parks his taxi outside his building. The streets are deserted. With everyone at home asleep, he carefully hides the body under a sofa in the living room. He then waits in his bedroom for the next few hours, plotting his next move. When he's sure everyone's left for work in the morning, Lam gets started.
As a voyeur with a perverse curiosity about the female anatomy, Lam has previously taken photos of naked women in pornographic magazines. But for the first time, he now has a real model to work with, even though she's dead.
跟住咧，佢就逐筆咁樣影相啦。
包括着衫前，跟住咧係每除一件衫，佢就影一張相。He even tapes her eyes because he doesn't want her watching him. With his night shift approaching, Lamb knows he can't leave the dead woman in his room. He needs to hide the evidence. So he decides to saw the body into 7 parts. It takes him several hours to clean up the flat. He wraps the body parts
in a newspaper and makes several trips with the packets to his taxi. But no one gives him a second glance. Lamb then heads out in the evening in search of an isolated spot to get rid of the body parts. He stops at the edge of the Shingmun River near Shaotin in Hong Kong's new territories. One week later, when the body parts of 21-year-old Chan Fung-lan surface on Shingmun River and news of it hits the headlines, Lamb realizes he needs a better plan. Hacking the body with a crude electric saw was too messy. Determined to leave no trace next time round, he pores over anatomy books. His search for the right instruments leads him to surgical equipment. He obsessively records every detail.
He kept records of everything, which for a homicide investigator's point of view was absolutely marvelous. He kept records of receipts from shops where he bought surgical equipment. He had a huge number of photographs of what had been going on. And perhaps video was just the next step, a photographic record of what he was doing.
Lamb then scouts the city for a new dumping ground. The river is obviously not good enough. He zeroes in onto Tai Hung Road, a wooded residential area in the northern part of Hong Kong Island. This is where he will go on to dump his next 3 victims.
咁嘅情形之下咧，我哋咧就回想起當初我哋發現第一個死者嗰陣時咧，我哋嘅調查方向揾嗰個的士司機咧係絕對正確嘅。如果我哋及時揾到林個人出嚟咧，有可能咧係已經係破咗案，第2、第3、第4嘅死者咧亦都唔會受害。
3 days after his arrest, Lamb's confessions in custody take the police to Tai Hung Road. 140 officers from the Homicide Bureau and Police Tactical Unit comb the slopes. Lamb helps by drawing up a map of where he threw the bodies. He's also brought to the site to indicate the exact locations. Over the next 2 days, police discovered decomposed bodies of 2 young women. Both are found in fetal positions inside rice sacks. The bodies are intact, but their sexual organs have been carefully cut out. It's almost as if Lamb left his personal signature on them.
A forensic anthropological study of the second skull reveals that the second body is that of Leung Wai Sum, the 17-year-old schoolgirl who was reported missing a week before Lamb was arrested. This is the same girl whose photos were found by the detectives in the Kodak store, and it explains why her red bag and white shoes were found in Lamb's room. For the first time, Lamb breaks down in police custody. This girl seems special.
Lam Kor Wan's confessions along the gruesome find of bodies at Tai Hung Road helps Hong Kong Police's Homicide Bureau piece together the story of their city's first serial killer. Lam reveals he committed 4 murders, all female passengers of his taxi. Fueled by his lust for murder, he says he picked up women who he thought were promiscuous. Chan Wan-kit, a 31-year-old cashier on night shift, and Lung Sao-wan, a 29-year-old waitress at a nightclub, were unsuspecting victims of Lam's warped morality. He killed them without remorse.
There was some degree of similarity between the first 3 victims. They all worked in the entertainment industry.
Lam admits that after every murder, he spent the next day locked up in his room, carving out the female's sexual organs from the body.
To remove pubic bones, literally you will have to saw through the pelvis. It's not easy, and it would involve a lot of removal of tissues, etc. But not impossible if you have the time.
But as his confessions to police reveal, there was something different about Lam's 4th and final victim. Leung Wai-sum steps out of the Sheraton Hotel in Chim Sa Tsui after a graduation dinner. The 17-year-old's mother had given her money for a taxi instead of the metro, her usual way home.
It was only after this young lady got into his cab that he realized perhaps she was not, first and foremost, as old as the other victims, nor was she intoxicated, nor was she perhaps dressed in a way which might suggest that she was a hostess or a waitress from a lounge.
Lam draws her into conversation. They talk of school, family, and religion. She's lulled into a sense of comfort. Until she realizes he's not taking her home. Her protests go in vain as Lam quickly handcuffs her.
The young girl was in a terrified state and was pleading with him to let her go. And he says that he did feel remorseful about what was going on.
Worn by indecision, Lam drives around for several hours. It's the longest he's ever spent with any of his victims. He likes being with her. In fact, at some point during the night, both fall asleep in the car.
咁佢甚至承認咧，佢係好中意呢個女死者。佢自己本身亦都唔想帶佢。
Nonetheless, again, in a phrase which I think he used more than once, all in a rush, he killed her.
With morbid precision, Lam goes through his normal post-murder routine. But this time, unlike the others, he performs necrophilia on his victim.
跟住之後咧，佢曾經對個鏡頭咧係笑過一下。咁我覺得佢呢個笑容咧係非常之邪惡嘅一個笑容。咁我到而家咧，我仲好深刻嘅笑容都喺我腦裏邊。
Over a month later, Lam Kor Wan is arrested at the Kodak store, where he had deposited the roll with Lung Wai Sum's photos. But it takes the Hong Kong police another 6 months to corroborate Lam's confessions with all the evidence and complete the investigation. Finally, on 3rd March 1983, Hong Kong's most sensational murder trial begins.
Inside, appearing before Mr. Justice Weber, Lam Kor Wan looked jaded and was hesitant when he pleaded guilty of manslaughtering 4 women between February and July last year. Men were picked for the jury because it was considered that the more than 1,000 pieces of evidence to be presented in the case were too gruesome for women.
The Crown prosecution accuses Lam of murdering 4 women. His own artistic endeavors are used against him. 696 color negatives, 1,500 color slides, 1,900 systematically coded photos, and 3 videotapes. Lam admits to manslaughter, but not murder. He declares he is a messenger of God and killed on God's instructions. At the same time, he dubs himself the Rainy Night Killer, claiming that the rains triggered an urge to kill.
It could well be a fabrication of a clever person trying to make it look as though he'd been compelled to do things.
The defense pleads temporary insanity. Gilbert Rodway, Lam's chief defense counsel, believes Lam killed because he was delusional and allegedly didn't know right from wrong. He lacked free will.
To put it very simply, what they have to determine is whether this man is mad or bad.
The reception at the Supreme Court this morning was low-key, but crowds began gathering in the afternoon when news got around about what must be Hong Kong's most sensational trial.
4-time killer Lam Kor Wan turns into Hong Kong's most hated celebrity. The city is simultaneously repulsed and intrigued. Psychiatrists from Hong Kong and abroad testify after examining Lam. Not surprisingly, they differ in their analysis of him. Dr. Paul Tam, a Hong Kong-based clinical psychiatrist, revisits the debate.
It was like a Hong Kong civil war, I can tell you. We were taking sides. Lam pleaded manslaughter, but he was backed up by 2 psychiatrists. They defended Lam and said that he acted out of acute psychotic disorder. This meant that he was not in full control of his faculties.
Australian psychiatrist David Barnes testified that he's convinced that Lam is suffering from serious psychosis, a mental disease that can lay dormant for many years until it's jerked into activity by a possibly trivial incident.
The prosecution debunks Lam's claims.
Once the evidence had built up to show the degree of sophistication in planning, to show how careful he had been, people started to look the other way and to think that this wasn't a spontaneous series of acts. This wasn't something over which he had no control.
The prosecution is convinced that Lam is too clever to be delusional. They're certain Lam's misleading the psychiatrists with different versions of his stories to escape the death penalty. The sheer burden of contradictory psychiatric opinions add to the confusion. But Lam knows a plea of manslaughter on grounds of insanity can get him a lighter sentence.
In terms of his intellect, I think Lam was certainly a very intelligent man. He played chess. He had one of the first electronic chess games available in Hong Kong and had the game tuned up to the highest possible levels of difficulty. He seemed to me to be a type of person who could become deeply engrossed, almost completely captivated by things which interested him. Now, how that developed to a level whereby he could almost alienate himself from the pain and suffering which he must have understood he was causing people and become so detached from that, I don't know.
In the opinion of Hong Kong's local psychiatrists, Lam shows signs of a personality disorder.
He is a sexual deviant, and he was a psychopath. He was a quiet person. He had a schizoid personality. A schizoid person is a person who's very quiet, withdrawn, and on the other hand, very sensitive to comments made by other people.
It explains why Lam preferred to be a night shift taxi driver, even though it's an incredibly lonely job. Lam liked his own company. He had control over his own world, where he could choose whom he wanted to pick up and whom he didn't. Lam's schedule also gave him time alone at home during the day, allowing him to hide his actions from his family, even though they lived in the same tiny flat.
佢屋企人咧就當時好震驚啦，佢哋都根本係冇意識，即係林過雲係會做啲咁嘅嘢，做啲咁嘅行為嘅人。
But a personality disorder is a common psychological condition. It cannot legally absolve Lam of murder. Psychiatrists dig up his past to find out what triggered his sexual deviance. They discovered Lam's parents had separated when he was very young. Lam lived with his father, who had married 3 times. His mother believed her son had an abused childhood, as Lam's strict father punished him often.
At a very young age, he was sent to Brunei, and he certainly didn't have much paternal or maternal love. He had to grow up with his mother, and his father also confessed that he was beaten up all the time by his dad. He certainly didn't have much of a happy childhood.
Lam grew up a loner. Like any other boy his age, he developed a fascination for the opposite sex.
佢甚至乎咧喺外國咧訂啲咁嘅色情雜誌翻嚟，咁甚至乎有啲雜誌咧中間咧，我哋發覺咧喺佢屋企揾到啲色情雜誌咧，佢係將個雜誌裏邊嘅性器官係剪咗出嚟。咁佢有一次咧，佢自己去召妓，但係咧佢就係因為係無能啊，咁佢曾經俾個妓女咧係恥笑過佢。
Psychiatrists believed that this rejection and his impotence deterred him from getting close to women. And so he substituted real female contact with bodies of dead women he could experiment with. Lam himself claims that the only time he had ever had sex was with the corpse of 17-year-old Lung. On the 21st day of Lam Kor Wan's trial, the jury begin their final deliberations. All of Hong Kong wait to hear the verdict.
The 7-man jury began their deliberation at about 11:30 a.m. and shortly after 3 p.m. they returned with a unanimous verdict of murder on all 4 counts. In a hardly audible voice, Judge Baber then sentenced Lam Kor Wan to death.
The unanimous verdict pleases everyone, including family members of Lam's victims.
The father of Lam's first victim, Chan Fung Lan, said the verdict was very fair and he will tell his daughter about it at her grave.
Well, you think people wanted to have him executed. Be that as it may, and the only penalty which the judge could impose at the time under the law in Hong Kong was a death penalty. Subsequent to that, of course, in the knowledge that it would be commuted to life imprisonment.
Over a year later, on 29 August 1984, the Hong Kong government, in keeping with British legal tradition, commutes Lam Kor Wan's death sentence to life imprisonment. After the trials, Lam's father put up memorials at the Union Institute, a columbarium in Hong Kong, in memory of the 4 victims. Lam Kor Wan is currently serving his life sentence at the maximum security Shek Pik prison in Hong Kong. Even today, 27 years later, Lam remains a recluse.
林個人其實喺監獄入邊咧係單獨囚禁嘅，好多嗰啲囚犯根本就冇辦法接觸到佢嘅，甚至乎每日林個人咧被放風，所謂放風咧就放佢出嚟散步，都有幾個懲教員係睇住佢嘅。
Prison guards reveal that Lam hasn't had a visitor in 5 years. But Lam remains a voracious reader, devouring books on human psychology, feng shui, Chinese zodiacs, and fortune-telling. It's been almost 3 decades, but the indelible effects of the Lam Kor Wan case are still resonant in the lives of the people of Hong Kong.
No homicide investigation is a nice thing to be involved in, but as a purely academic exercise, it was a remarkable case.
其實對我嚟講係一種好恐怖嘅手法。我諗我都對呢單新聞嘅印象係好深刻嘅。
It certainly was a landmark case for Hong Kong in that I don't think even now, after all these years, we have any case that is similar.
如果佢放翻出嚟咧，我叫我太太唔好搭的士咯。